The events took place in Zamora, Spain. Juan Oliver, a newly appointed prison guard, decided to show up for work a day early to familiarize himself with his duties. His colleagues showed him around the prison, demonstrated the area where the most dangerous prisoners were held, and the ingenious homemade weapons they crafted, instructing him not to trust anyone and to always keep an eye on their hands. However, during the tour, a piece of the ceiling fell on him, and he lost consciousness. His colleagues quickly carried him to an empty cell 211 to administer first aid so they wouldn't have to carry him all the way to the infirmary. At that very moment, a dangerous prisoner attacked an officer in the yard. This sparked a riot, and the ceiling incident turned out to be part of a diversion. The prisoners took control of the prison. Guard Armando tried to help, but realizing the danger, he and his colleagues fled, leaving the unconscious Juan alone in the cell. Chaos reigns around them, and the guards are powerless. One of the prisoners found Juan, slapped him, and he came to his senses. The stranger did not understand where Juan came from or who he was, so he simply locked him in the cell. Amid the chaos, Juan realizes where he is and understands that in order to survive, he must pretend to be a new prisoner. The man quickly got his bearings. He hid his documents and made himself look more unkempt. Two prisoners burst into the cell and pointed to the exit. They took him to the leader of the riot, Malamadre. Nothing happens in this prison without his knowledge. He was the one who started the chaos by attacking the officer earlier. Juan lied to the leader, saying that he was a new prisoner from cell 211 and had been sentenced to 19 years for taking someone's life. Malamadre sees right through Juan's gentle nature and does not believe him. Malamadre ordered him to take off his clothes. Under pressure, Juan obeyed, listening to a bunch of inappropriate comments from the prisoners around him. From now on, Juan has a nickname, calzones, which means underwear in Spanish. Meanwhile, the officers report to management that one of their new employees is still inside. Security and the GEO Special Police Unit team begin to develop a plan to free him. Juan had a peaceful life and a pregnant wife, Elena. Now he is literally stuck in this chaos. On Malamadre's orders, the prisoners destroyed all the surveillance cameras, but Juan recommended leaving at least one, in case they wanted to show something to the officers during negotiations. In this way, he secured at least one source of communication for himself. The leader praised him for the idea. Juan crawled close to the camera to cover it with fabric, and the officers understood his intention. Juan was deceiving the leader and playing his own game of survival. The guard who was attacked by Malamadre at the beginning of the riot also remained inside, and one of the prisoners wants to take revenge on him for the brutal 20 days in solitary confinement. Meanwhile, the police are already preparing to storm the prison. Special forces have arrived. Malamadre learns that 3 bombers, Basque militants linked to the ETA organization, are being held in the special block and decides to use them as a political bargaining chip in the negotiations. He shows them on camera. 10 years ago, Malamadre already eliminated one of the officers, so now he faces life imprisonment. He has nothing to lose. Negotiating with him will be extremely difficult, especially when he has such dangerous people as hostages. Since Juan is educated, Malamadre asks him to write down his demands to be passed on to the officers, and even praises his handwriting, to which Juan invents a story that he was preparing for a job interview at the post office and practiced writing a lot. Malamadre's main demand is to dismiss the chief warden because it is his doing that people are kept in solitary confinement for 20 days, and that uncontrolled cruelty reigns in the prison. The second demand, regular visits from loved ones every 2 weeks. Also, doctors and examinations must be conducted properly, not through bars. Ernesto Almanza, sent from the ministry, arrives for negotiations. Armando briefs him on the situation, pointing out Apache, Malamadre's close associate who guards the hostages, on camera. Apache himself does not trust the newcomer Juan and does not understand why Malamadre has taken him under his wing. They have indeed become close, talking a lot about personal matters, and Juan has even told him about his pregnant wife. Malamadre calls Ernesto inside for negotiations and orders Juan to search him. Juan, obeying the order, whispers to the negotiator, "They're in the bathroom," referring to the ETA hostages. Malamadre hands over the written demands. Ernesto demands to see the hostages, but the leader refuses to comply with his conditions. He also asks for shrimp, food, and contraband for everyone. Unexpectedly, Malamadre adds another demand, to allow Juan to talk to his pregnant wife. Ernesto agrees. He and Juan are already heading for the exit to call Elena, but suddenly there is a commotion in the block. Juan runs to check what happened, while Malamadre takes the negotiator hostage. It turns out that one of the prisoners was badly injured and didn't survive. The officers watching assume from his facial features that the man who didn't survive is one of the important hostages. They have no choice but to alert all units and prepare to storm the prison. Juan acts immediately. He runs to the ETA hostages. At this very moment, the special forces are preparing to enter through the roof. Juan pushes the hostages in front of the camera, showing that all three are alive. The special forces are ordered to cancel the operation. The prisoners rejoice, chanting the names of Juan and Malamadre, who prevented the assault. However, Malamadre sternly orders Juan not to act without his knowledge again, as he did this time. Meanwhile, in the infirmary, Officer Utrilla beats information out of a prisoner, who told Malamadre about the ETA hostages. Armando is shocked by the cruelty and says that you can't treat people like that, but that doesn't stop the officer. Finally, the prisoner names the informant. It is Borrego, the prison barber who cuts the hair of both prisoners and guards. Armando warns that he will write about the beatings in his report and will not keep quiet. However, Utrilla is not concerned. The news about the situation in the prison is broadcast on television. Elena sees it. Worried, she calls her husband. Armando picks up the phone and introduces himself as Juan's new colleague. He lies that Juan is in another block and cannot come to the phone. She says she saw everything on TV, but Armando assures her that the journalists are exaggerating. He decides to hide the truth so as not to upset the pregnant woman and advises her to go home. However, once she got into the car, she understood everything and did not go home. Meanwhile, in prison, the prisoners were brought shrimp. Malamadre brought some to the hostages to mock them. He despises the saboteurs for their cowardice, considering their methods pathetic and themselves incapable of fighting one-on-one without their explosive devices. Elena recalled how she wanted Juan to stay home and not go to work early, but he did not listen. She went to the prison herself. Meanwhile, the prisoners are having a real feast, a banquet. Malamadre nostalgically recalls his time of freedom, remembering how he used to sit by the sea with a beer. Apache keeps a watchful eye on Juan. Juan looked at the walkie-talkie that Malamadre had left on the bench when he went to deal with one of the prisoners. This insolent man caused the death of the prisoner Sebas during the riot, the same one whom the police had mistakenly taken for an ETA hostage. Malamadre warned him not to do it again and fed him shrimp scraps. Juan quietly stole Malamadre's radio and hid in one of the cells to contact the officers. Meanwhile, all the prisoners were watching TV, where they were talking about their prison and how this was the first time in Spain that ETA members had been taken hostage. It turned out that riots had also broken out in other prisons, and the prisoners were cheerfully chanting about it. Relatives and friends gathered outside the prison, demanding a resolution to the situation and information about the wounded. Ernesto responded to Juan's call. Juan reported that the hostages were in cell 219, but Malamadre was constantly moving them. Juan wanted to know the details of the Special Forces operation, but the police refused to provide any information. This outraged Juan, but the Spanish government had agreed with the Basque government not to risk the lives of ETA members. At least Ernesto assured Juan that his wife was fine. Suddenly, Malamadre noticed that his radio was missing. The search was in vain. Then Apache saw Juan come out of the cell, approach Malamadre, and give it back, advising him to be more careful. Juan justified himself by saying that he had taken it when Malamadre left it unattended in order to protect it from theft. Apache went to his cell. He had a hidden cell phone. He called the officers he had connections with and, to find out the truth, dictated the name. Meanwhile, Elena joined the protest of prisoners' families at the prison entrance and asked the guards about Juan. Armando went to the barber. It turned out that the barber had told one of the prisoners about the transfer of ETA members, and the rumor had reached Malamadre. That was how the leader planned the riot, having received such a trump card. At that moment, an ambulance left the prison and was immediately stormed by protesters. Elena barely made her way through the crowd. The special forces began beating people en masse, and Officer Utrilla and his men also joined in. Malamadre demanded over the radio that the beatings stop, but Ernesto assured him that everything was under control. Apache, using his connections, had already learned the truth about Juan. He whispered to him that he knew everything and demanded a favorable deal, promising not to tell Malamadre the truth. Elena felt sick in the mass scuffle. Suddenly, Juan saw her on TV. He reacted instantly. He asked Malamadre for a walkie-talkie and reported that Elena was in the courtyard and needed to be taken away immediately. Ernesto ordered the special forces to stop the scuffle and take Juan's wife away. The beating continued, but the cameras cut out. Nothing else could be seen on TV. In the chaos, one of the officers, Utrilla, hit Juan's wife, and when she fell, he did not react or help her. She was taken to the hospital unconscious. In the evening, when everything had calmed down, Malamadre demanded information from Ernesto about what had happened and a list of the injured. Ernesto lied that Elena was fine. Juan demanded to talk to her, or better yet, to see her. Ernesto wanted to release Juan from prison for an hour, but Malamadre forbade him to leave right now. Juan desperately tried to catch the news signal on the radio, but in vain. Apache knows that Juan stole the radio, and he knows who he is. He began to threaten Juan, blackmailing him that he would tell Malamadre everything. But Juan is no idiot. He realized that Apache has contacts in the police, and maybe he is even an undercover police informant in prison. They made a deal. Apache would find out what happened to Juan's wife, and in return, Juan wouldn't tell Malamadre that Apache was working for the officers. Meanwhile, on TV, everyone condemns the police's actions against civilians outside and inside the prison walls. The prison warden warns Officer Utrilla that his actions, especially injuring Elena, will result in at least his dismissal. So, he is ordered to pack his things. Malamadre talks to Juan, not yet knowing the whole truth. He believes that Juan will be able to get out in 7 years and see his child, and Malamadre will take full responsibility for the riot. He also confessed that he has an 8-year-old son whom he has never seen. They brought him a list of those injured in the beating, but there were only 4 names on it, which was a blatant lie. This angered Malamadre. He decided to eliminate one of the ETA members to prove to the officers that he was not joking. Juan emotionally refused and instead suggested cutting off the hostage's ear. However, as a result of the arguments, Malamadre's right-hand man forced Juan to do it himself. He hesitated for a few seconds, but did it anyway. He had never done anything like this before, but he had no choice. Looking in the mirror, he saw himself as a different person. After that, Malamadre called him over. He was sad and silent. As it turned out, Apache had found out what had happened. At least 20 people were wounded. 7 were in serious condition in the hospital, including Elena. Apache showed a video clearly showing Officer Utrilla hitting Elena. Juan demanded that this officer be called in for negotiations. Utrilla had already been officially dismissed, but he still went down to the prison block. Malamadre met him, gave him a cigarette, but at that moment, threatening him with a knife, forced him to go to the basement. The situation got out of the police's control. Nothing was visible on the cameras. The officer is surrounded by prisoners led by Juan. Utrilla tries to justify himself, saying that he didn't notice the woman and that it was an accident, but that's a lie. He saw everything and just left her lying in the crowd. Juan rushes at the officer, but Malamadre holds him back. Armando tried to calm Juan over the radio, but Juan seemed to understand everything. He assumed that his wife had lost the baby and that he was being lied to. But it got even worse. Elena passed away after several hours in the hospital. Juan was overcome with despair. Malamadre silently embraced him. The oppressive silence instantly turned to rage. The prisoners, unable to forgive Utrilla, attacked him. In the chaos, the officer shouted, "Juan is actually a guard. He lied to you." The prisoners stopped, but at that moment, Juan, gathering all his rage, pulled out the knife he had used earlier and attacked the officer, ending his life. It was revenge for his wife. In complete despair, Juan no longer saw any point in living. He took off his belt and tried to take his own life, but it broke. He sobbed on the floor, looking at the inscriptions on the wall. There were messages scratched there by those who had lived there before. Meanwhile, ETA responded to the riot by blowing up a car, which was already being reported in the newspapers and on the news. It seems that despite Utrilla's accusations, Malamadre still believes Juan and considers him a friend. A new negotiator arrived, but it was too late. Juan personally dragged the officer's body and showed it to the representative of the authorities. He also admitted his responsibility for this. Juan threatens that if their conditions are not met, they will harm the hostages, and Utrilla's body is only proof of their intentions. Juan becomes extreme in his views. Now he completely distrusts the police, having seen with his own eyes the misconduct of some of them. He demands public promises to end the regime of cruel guards, abolish isolation cells. He demands to see a public statement from the minister on television. Malamadre agreed with Juan's arguments, but then, in private, he gave him a dressing down and warned him once again not to act without his knowledge. Malamadre ordered the hostages to be transferred to cell 225 and no one to be allowed to visit them. Meanwhile, the officers called Malamadre to a remote area. There, the police handed over a folder with Juan's employment documents. Ernesto revealed the truth. Malamadre said he didn't believe it. Then Ernesto hinted at the government's promise. Malamadre could be released in a year or even sooner, but there was one condition. It was a direct hint at Juan's elimination. The leader is outraged by this. All the prisoners armed themselves, waiting for the special forces to storm the prison. There were 10 minutes left for the officers to get in touch and agree to the terms. But the special forces had already planned everything. The invasion was going ahead. Malamadre came to Juan and they smoked together. Juan realized that Malamadre knew everything. The leader admitted that it took a lot of courage to pretend to be a prisoner in such an environment. Malamadre said that he had been offered freedom in exchange for eliminating Juan, but he refused. It seemed that in this short time, he had come to see him as a friend. He added that he had hoped that if the officers hadn't told him, Juan would have confessed himself sooner or later. But now, he would never know. Suddenly, the TV turned on. The ministry's address was about to begin. But it was just a diversionary tactic. On the second floor, there was a betrayal. Apache stabbed the hostages' guards, and smoke and gas grenades flew through the windows. Juan rushed to eliminate the hostages, but Malamadre stopped him. There was no time. In the chaos, Apache wounded Juan with a crafted harpoon. Malamadre rushed to him, trying to help and encourage him, saying that everything would be fine. While he was sitting next to Juan, Apache shot at Malamadre, but only grazed him. Malamadre tried to get up and move closer, but Apache fired again. The last thing Juan saw was the special forces descending from the roof directly into the prison block. Later, when everything had calmed down, Armando identified Juan's body. Malamadre was taken to the hospital. He was still alive. Armando entered cell 211, where he found Juan's wedding ring and a message scratched on the wall. The officers involved in the case will never forgive themselves for failing to save Juan and Elena Oliver, who fell victims to the horrific circumstances at Zamora prison. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Movie Fist channel so you don't miss out on the most interesting movie plots.